My name is Kaylin Vane. I am 29 years old. For 14 years, I was the charity case, the tragic best friend, the quiet shadow standing 2 steps behind Serafina Croft while she dazzled Manhattan's elite. Her family took me, and when mine was destroyed, they paid for my education, clothed me in their last season designer cast-offs, and reminded me, every single day, of exactly how much I owed them. Serafina collected accolades, inheritances, and, eventually, the most eligible heir in the city, Vance Sterling. I collected her secrets. I organized her life, designed the architectural proposals she put her name on, and smiled politely when her mother introduced me at galas as Serafina's little project. But on the night of Serafina's engagement party at the Sterling estate, surrounded by 400 guests draped in diamonds and silk, a man I had never seen before bumped into my shoulder. He didn't apologize. He simply slipped a blank, heavy, wax-sealed envelope into the pocket of my blazer, leaned in close enough for me to smell the petrichor and expensive scotch clinging to his coat, and whispered a single word: run. What Serafina didn't know, what the entire Croft family had spent millions trying to bury, was that the envelope contained the one thing capable of turning their gilded empire into ash. They thought they owned me. They thought my loyalty was a permanent, unshakable debt. But they forgot one crucial detail about shadows. We see everything, and we know exactly where the light doesn't reach. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If you have ever been kept around, simply to make someone else look better, if you know the suffocating weight of a toxic friendship disguised as salvation, I want you to comment the word shadow below. Let me know I am not alone in this. And if you want to know what happens when the charity case finally bites back, keep reading, because the destruction of the Croft Empire didn't happen overnight. It was a masterpiece, 14 years in the making. To understand the absolute devastation of that night, I have to take you back to the beginning, to the autumn of 2010, when the Vane family name still meant something in the architectural world. My father, Julian Vane, was a visionary. He designed eco-sustainable skyscrapers before it was a corporate buzzword. Vane Innovations was valued at $80 million. The Crofts were our neighbors. In the Hamptons, Serafina and I were 15. We rode horses together. We studied for the SATs together. I thought she was my sister in everything, but blood. Then came the crash. Not the market crash, but a highly targeted, surgically precise hostile takeover. Overnight, my father's patents were locked in. Litigation. Our accounts were frozen. A scandal broke out involving embezzled funds my father swore he never touched. The stress triggered his fatal heart attack in the foyer of our Manhattan townhouse. 2 weeks later, mydelzinodios.com. Mother, fragile and entirely dependent on a life that no longer existed, took too many sleeping pills. At 15, I was an orphan with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a tarnished last name. Arthur Croft, Serafina's father, stepped in. He played the grieving best friend to the press perfectly. He became my legal guardian. He moved me into the Croft penthouse on the Upper East Side. The media praised his generosity. Billionaire rescues orphaned daughter of disgraced architect, the headlines read. I was so grateful. I was so young, so broken, and so blindingly naive. I believed them when they said they were saving me. The dynamic shifted almost immediately. I was moved into the guest room near the Procant service elevator. Serafina's mother, Evelyn, started treating me less like a second daughter and more like an unpaid live-in assistant for Serafina. Kaylin, darling, Evelyn would say, adjusting her Cartier necklace in the places. A mirror. Serafina is terribly stressed about her history paper. Be a dear and help her research? You're so good at the academic things. Serafina has to focus on her social obligation. We all have our roles, don't we? I wrote the paper. Serafina got the A. I got a polite nod and a plate of leftovers from the kitchen. I convinced myself it was a fair trade. They were putting a roof over my head. They were paying my tuition at the private academy. I owed them. I internalized that debt until it became my entire identity. I learned to be invisible. I learned to anticipate Serafina's needs before she even voiced them. By the time we were 22, both attending an Ivy League university, the line between my life and Serafina's had completely blurred, mostly because she had absorbed mine. I inherited my father's mind for spatial design and structural engineering. I spent my nights in the studio, drafting complex, beautiful architectural models. Serafina spent her nights at networking mixers, schmoozing with real estate developers. In the spring of 2017, the university held its capstone architectural showcase. The winner would receive a guaranteed fellowship at Vanguard Design, the most prestigious firm in the country. I spent 6 months on my project, a self-sustaining urban housing complex based on my father's unfinished blueprints. It was my tribute to him. It was my ticket out of the Crofts. Shadow. The morning of the submission, my hard drive was completely wiped. My physical models, which I had stored in the university's shared studio, were crushed. Someone had knocked a heavy steel shelving unit onto the table. It looked like an accident. The security cameras in that hallway had conveniently been scheduled for maintenance. I sat on the floor of the studio, surrounded by the splintered balsa wood and shattered acrylic of my father's legacy, unable to breathe. Serafina found me. There. She knelt in her pristine white cashmere coat, wrapping her arms around me, shushing my sobs. "Oh, Kaylin," she murmured, stroking my hair. "It's going to be okay. It's just a project. You can always work as an associate somewhere else. You're so resilient." 3 hours later, the showcase began. I sat in the back row, hollowed out, watching the presentations. Then, Serafina Croft was called to the stage. The lights dimmed, the projector screen hummed to life, and there, rotating in, three-dimensional perfection, was my design. She hadn't just stolen the concept, she had stolen my backup files from the Croft family server. She had altered the title card. She stood at the podium, smiling with practiced modesty, and explained the sustainable water filtration system I had spent 3 sleepless weeks calculating. She used my exact phrasing. She hit every emotional beat. The auditorium erupted in applause. The judges were in tears. I stared at the stage, the world tilting violently on its axis. I waited for her, in the corridor afterward. When she walked out, flanked by congratulatory professors, she saw my face. She quickly excused herself and pulled me into an empty stairwell. Before I could even speak, her eyes filled with tears. Real, heavy tears. It was a terrifying parlor trick. "Kaylin, please. You have to understand," she whispered, grabbing my hands. "My father threatened to cut me off if I didn't secure the Vanguard Fellowship. He said I was an embarrassment." I panicked. The models broke, and I used your digital files. "I'm so sorry, I'll make it up to you. I'll hire you at Vanguard as my lead consultant. We'll be a team, just like always." "You stole my father's design," I said, my voice shaking so hard it barely made a sound. Her grip on my hands tightened, her nails digging into my skin. The tears vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness that looked exactly like Arthur Croft. "And who are they going to believe, Kaylin?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The daughter of Arthur Croft? Or the charity case whose father died a disgraced embezzler? We gave you everything. If you say a word, my father will pull your tuition funding. You'll be on the street by midnight with no degree and no future. Do not bite the hand that feeds you." I was 22. I had $12 in my checking account. I believed her. So, I adapted. I learned the most dangerous lesson the Crofts could have ever taught me. Survival requires absolute silence. I dropped my architecture major. The next day, I switched to archival sciences and forensic accounting. I told Serafina I had lost my passion for design. I told her I wanted something quieter. She was thrilled. A quiet Kaylin was a safe Kaylin. Over the next 7 years, I played my role to perfection. Serafina became a Pratina, rising star at Vanguard Design, entirely fueled by the private sketches and solutions I drafted for her on the weekends. I worked as a senior archivist at a historical society, making a modest salary, living in a small apartment in the Sierne, Brooklyn that the Crofts co-signed for a constant reminder that I was still on their leash. And then came Vance Sterling. Vance was old money. Sterling Logistics controlled shipping ports across 3 continents. He was brilliant, guarded, and notoriously difficult to impress. Serafina set her sights on him in 2022, but Vance wasn't interested in socialites. He was interested in intellect, in history, in architecture. So, Serafina used me. "Kaylin, I have a dinner date with Vance tomorrow," she would say, pacing my mall living room in her Louboutins. "He's obsessed with brutalist architecture. Give me talking points. Give me an opinion I can use." I gave her the talking points. I essentially wrote the script for their entire courtship. When Vance mentioned a rare first edition book on urban planning, I tracked it down through my archival contacts so Serafina could present it to him as a lucky find in an antique shop. I crafted the witty text messages she sent him at 2 a.m. I became the ghost in the machine of their relationship. It worked. Vance fell in love with the woman Serafina pretended to be. Vance fell in love with the woman Serafina pretended to be. Woman I actually was. Christmas 2023. The Croft family estate in the Hamptons. 30 guests gathered. In the main parlor, the fire was roaring. Champagne flowed. I was stationed near the back, tasked by Evelyn Croft with ensuring the catering staff didn't drop the hors d'oeuvre. Arthur Croft clinked his glass. The room fell silent. "Friends, family," Arthur boomed, his hand resting proudly on Vance Sterling's shoulder. "Tonight, we celebrate the union of two great families. Vance has asked for my daughter's hand, and I could not be more thrilled to welcome him into the Croft legacy." Applause echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Serafina extended her left hand, a 5-carat flawless diamond catching the firelight. She looked radiant. "Perfect. Intouchable." Vance smiled, but his eyes drifted over the crowd. For a fraction of a second, his gaze locked onto mine. He gave a small, polite nod. He didn't really know me. To him, I was just Serafina's quiet, slightly awkward childhood friend who organized her closet. He had absolutely no idea that every conversation that had made him fall in love with his fiancée had actually been with me. Later that evening, in the kitchen, Serafina cornered me. She was slightly immersée, flushed from the champagne. "You're going to be my maid of honor." "Obviously," she said, checking her reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. "Of course," I said, my voice neutral. "Good. The wedding is going to be the event of the decade. Merging Croft Real Estate with Sterling Logistics. My father says it will increase our portfolio valuation by 40%. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming. "I need you to handle the planners, Kaylin. I can't be bothered with the details. Make it perfect." "I will. You're a lifesaver." She reached out and patted my cheek, the way one might praise a loyal dog. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You really are part of this family." She walked away, leaving the scent of her Chanel perfume hanging in the air. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the swinging door. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried over Serafina Croft in 7 years. Instead, I went back to my apartment, opened my laptop, and accessed the encrypted offshore servers I had spent the last 4 years quietly building backdoors into. Forensic accounting wasn't just a career switch, it was a weapon. I had spent thousands of hours tracing the shell companies, the dummy corporations, the silence wire transfers that Arthur Croft had executed over the last decade. I was looking for the missing pieces of my father's ruined company. I hadn't found the smoking gun yet, but I was getting close. I just needed more time. Which brings us to the 14th of October 2024, the engagement party. The Sterling estate on Long Island was a fortress of limestone and manicured hedges. 400 guests, a 20-piece orchestra playing Vivaldi on the Kurzling terrace, ice sculptures that wept slowly onto silver platters. The sheer concentration of wealth in that single room could have funded a small country. I wore a simple, understated navy gown. Serafina had picked it out for me. "Navy makes you look so reliable, Kaylin," she had said. Translation: Navy makes you blend into the background so you don't pull focus from my custom Oscar de la Renta. I spent the first 2 hours of the party acting as a human shield for Serafina, intercepting overzealous relatives, managing the catering director's panic over Sevenid, a delayed caviar shipment, and ensuring Evelyn's glass of Pinot Grigio was never pliant as los empty. At 9:30 p.m., Arthur Croft took the microphone on the grand staircase. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed, carrying that specific cadence of a man who has never been told no. if I could have your attention, tonight is not just a celebration of love between Serafina and Vance. It is a celebration, too, of the future. Effective upon their marriage next month, I will be stepping down as CEO of Croft Holdings, and Vance Sterling will be stepping in as co-chairman alongside my brilliant daughter. The room erupted into applause. Flashes from the event photographers lit up the staircase. Serafina kissed Vance's cheek, waving to the crowd, the picture of aristocratic grace. I stood by the massive mahogany doors at the entrance of the ballroom, holding Serafina's emergency makeup kit, perfectly invisible. That was when the stranger bumped into me. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that looked expensive but slightly worn at the elbows. He had sharp, assessing eyes, the color of oxidized copper. He didn't hold a drink. He wasn't mingling. He moved, with the predatory stillness of someone who is hunting. When his shoulder hit mine, it was deliberate. "Excuse me," I said, stepping back. He didn't apologize. He looked right at me, his eyes piercing through the facade I had maintained for 14 years. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax, and slid it smoothly into the pocket of my blazer. He stepped close. I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Run," he whispered. His voice was a low rasp, barely carrying over the sound of the applause. Before I could process the word, before I could ask who he was or what he meant, he turned and melted into the crowd, disappearing toward the terrace doors. I stood frozen. The envelope in my pocket felt impossibly heavy, like it was generating its own gravity. I looked up at the staircase. Serafina was laughing, Vance's arm around her waist. Arthur Croft was beaming, raising a glass of champagne to the photographers. The orchestra swelled. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was oblivious. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. I pushed through the heavy doors, walked down the long, carpeted corridor of Sterling Estate, and slipped into an empty library near the east wing. I locked the door behind me. The sounds of the party became a distant, muffled hum. The only light came from a single brass reading lamp on the desk. My hands were shaking as I pulled the envelope from my pocket. The red wax seal had no crest, just a smooth, flat thumbprint. I broke the wax. Inside there were 3 items. The first was a photograph. An old, grainy security camera still, time-stamped, the 3rd of October 2010. The night my father's company was hostilely taken over. The night the embezzlement scandal broke. The photo showed 2 people sitting in the private booth of a high-end Manhattan cigar bar. One was Arthur Croft. The other was a man I recognized instantly, Julian Vane, my father. But they weren't arguing. They weren't rivals. My father was sliding a thick, manila folder across the table toward Arthur. Arthur was smiling, handing my father a small velvet box. I stared at the image, my breath catching in my throat. The narrative I had been fed for 14 years that Arthur was the savior, that my father was the victim, of ruthless corporate sharks cracked. I pulled out the second item, a photocopy of a bank ledger from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account was named Project Vane. The deposit history showed a transfer of $40 million. The date of the transfer was the 4th of October 2010, the day after the photo was taken. The authorized signatory on the account wasn't Arthur Croft. It was Evelyn Croft, Serafina's mother. But it was the third item that made my knees give out, forcing me to sink into the leather chair behind the desk. It was another photograph, this one taken recently. It showed Serafina Croft sitting at her desk at Vanguard Design. On the desk in front of her, illuminated by the harsh light of a desk lamp, was a blue, leather-bound notebook. I knew that notebook. I had watched my father write in it every night of my childhood. It contained the master codes, the original patents, the foundational blueprints for every sustainable design he had ever created. The notebook, I was told, had burned in the fire that consumed his office. Serafina had it. She had always had it. Attached to the photo was a small, white index card. Handwritten in sharp, angular ink was a message. "They didn't ruin your father, Kaylin. They bought him. And when he tried to back out, they killed him. Arthur holds the money. Serafina holds the patents. Vance Sterling is the final piece they need to legitimize the stolen empire. The merger signs in 72 hours. You are the only loose end. Get out of the house, now. Late. I read the note 3 times. The letters blurred, swam, and settled back into a devastating, inescapable truth. My entire life, my gratitude, my submission, my poverty, my loyalty had been constructed on a foundation of absolute, sociopathic lies. They hadn't taken me in out of charity. They had taken me in to keep the heir of the Vane patents under their thumb, ensuring I would never go looking for the truth. I was a hostage who thought she was a guest. And Serafina knew. She had looked me in the eyes as a teenager, as a college student, as a bride-to-be, wearing my designs, spending my stolen inheritance, and patted my cheek like I was a loyal pet. A knock at the library door shattered the silence. "Kylan?" It was Vance's voice, deep, impatient, muffled through the heavy wood. "Kaylin, are you in there? Serafina is looking for you." She ripped the hem of her dress. "She needs you to fix it." I looked at the photos scattered on the desk. I looked at the locked door. The stranger's voice echoed in my head. "Run. If I ran now, I would be safe. I could take these documents to the police. I could disappear. I could survive." But as I stared at the photo of Serafina's manicured hand resting on my father's stolen notebook, something inside me, the quiet, compliant, terrified girl who had spent 14 years saying thank you to the people who destroyed. Her family died. I didn't want to survive anymore. I wanted to burn their house to the ground. And I wanted them inside it when it fell. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it into the hidden lining of my blazer. I stood up, smoothed my reliable navy dress, and walked to the door. I unlocked it and pulled it open. Vance stood there, frowning slightly, holding a glass of bourbon. "Everything. All right? You look pale." "I'm perfectly fine, Vance," I said, my voice steady, cool, and entirely foreign to my own ears. Just taking a moment to catch my breath. "The party is overwhelming. Serafina's waiting in the bridal suite upstairs," he said, taking a sip of his drink. He looked at me closely for a second. "You do a lot for her, Kaylin. She's lucky to have you." "We're family," I said, offering a flawless, empty smile. "We take care of each other." I walked past him, heading toward the grand staircase. I wasn't going to run. The stranger was wrong about one thing. I wasn't the loose end. I was the noose. The bridal suite at the Sterling estate smelled of expensive lilies and stale champagne. When I opened the heavy oak door, Serafina was standing in the center of the room, examining her reflection in a floor-to-ceiling gilded mirror. Her custom gown, a cloud of ivory silk and hand-sewn pearls, was flawless, except for a tiny, almost invisible tear near the hemline where a stiletto had caught the fabric. Evelyn Croft sat on a velvet chaise lounge nearby, nursing a crystal tumbler of sparkling water, her face a mask of elegant exhaustion. "There you are," Serafina sighed, not turning around, addressing my reflection in the glass. "Honestly, Kaylin, I was beginning to think you'd abandon me. The hem is ruined. Fix it before we have to go back down for the toast." 14 years of muscle memory took over. I walked to the vanity, retrieved the emergency sewing kit I had meticulously packed that morning, and knelt on the plush carpet at Serafina's feet. I threaded the needle with steady, practiced hands. My fingers didn't tremble. My heart wasn't racing. A strange, glacial calm had settled over my entire nervous system. The girl who had panicked at the thought of displeasing them was dead, left behind in that dim library, downstairs. The woman kneeling on the floor was merely a ghost, haunting them in plain sight. "Hold still," I murmured, sliding the needle through the delicate silk. "Vance says the press is absolutely eating up the merger announcement." Serafina chattered, oblivious to the fact that she was speaking to her executioner. "His father's logistics empire combined with my architectural patents. We're going to monopolize the sustainable shipping infrastructure market by next quarter. It's genius. Truly, Kaylin, my brain never stopped working. Her architectural patents, my father's life, my father's blood. It is a brilliant strategy," I replied, pulling the thread taut. I've been so good at taking what you need, Serafina." She laughed, a sharp tinkling sound. "Well, that's business, isn't it? You either conquer or you get conquered." Evelyn swirled the ice in her glass. "Don't speak like a mobster, darling. It's unbecoming of a Sterling. But she is right, Kaylin. The world belongs to those who are bold enough to claim it." Your poor father, God rest his soul, he lacked that killer instinct. He was too caught up in his ideals. That's why he lost everything. I kept my eyes on the hem of the dress. The urge to drive the sewing needle straight into the pale, unblemished skin of Serafina's ankle was a sudden, violent flare of heat in my chest, but I buried it. Violence was too cheap. It was too fast. What I had planned for them required patience. There, I said, biting off the excess thread and standing up. Good as new. No one will ever know it was torn. Serafina spun in front of the mirror, the silk cascading perfectly around her. You're a magician, Kaylin, truly. What would I do without you? You'll never have to find out, I lied, offering a soft smile. I survived the rest of the party on autopilot. I stood in the background of their photographs, a dutiful shadow in navy blue. I watched Arthur Croft shake, hands with senators and tech moguls selling the lie of his philanthropic brilliance. I watched Vance Sterling look at his fiancée with a mixture of admiration and strategic calculation. And through it all, I felt the heavy weight of the wax-sealed envelope pressing against my ribs, a ticking time bomb, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. I left the estate at 2 in the morning. I didn't take the Crofts' private car, service back to the city. I ordered an independent car, paying in cash, and spent the hour-long drive to Brooklyn staring out the window at the passing highway lights, turning the stranger's note over and over in my mind. They didn't ruin your father. They bought him. And when he tried to back out, they killed him. When I finally locked the door to my small, dimly lit apartment, I didn't take off my coat. I went straight to the false bottom of my closet, dragged out a heavy, fireproof lockbox, and extracted the encrypted laptop I used for my forensic archival work. I brewed a pot of black coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the glow of the Proceling Librino screen illuminating the photographs the stranger had given me. I needed to verify everything. If I was going to strike at billionaires, I couldn't rely on anonymous tips. I needed irrefutable digital steel. I booted up the back door I had built into the Croft Holdings server years ago. It was a slow, agonizing process. Their cybersecurity was top tier, but I knew the architecture of their system because I had watched their IT director upgrade it. I spent 4 hours tracing the routing numbers from the photocopy of the Bruce Cayman Islands ledger. By 6 a.m., my eyes burned, but the puzzle had finally locked into place. The stranger was telling the truth. The offshore account labeled Project Vane hadn't just held the $40 million used to buy my father's silence. Over the last 14 years, that exact account had been used to launder the royalties from my father's stolen patents. Every time Arthur Croft licensed out a revolutionary eco-design, the profits were funneled through 3 shell companies before landing in Evelyn, Croft's private Cayman trust. But the most damning piece of evidence was the timeline. My father hadn't died of a random heart attack. I pulled up the digitized autopsy report from 2010 file. I had paid a medical examiner's assistant a lot of money to unseal for me 2 years ago. The report noted elevated levels of potassium chloride in his blood, a detail dismissed at the time as a natural anomaly during cardiac arrest. But potassium chloride, administered intravenously in a high dose, causes immediate heart failure and leaves almost no trace. Arthur Croft hadn't just stolen our legacy. He had murdered my father in cold blood to secure it. And then he had looked me in the eyes at the funeral, held my sobbing 15-year-old frame, and promised to take care of me. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It clarified everything. I looked back at the stranger's handwritten note. L.T. Who was he? And why did he give this to me now? He knew the merger was signing in 72 hours. He knew my location. He knew the layout of the Sterling estate. He was an insider, or someone hunting from the periphery with incredible resources. I held the note up to the desk lamp, examining the cardstock. It was heavy, textured, the kind used for high-end corporate stationery. I tilted it, letting the light catch the surface. There, barely visible, was a blind debossed logo in the corner. A stylized raven holding a key. I knew that logo. In my archival work, tracking historical corporate espionage, I had come across it exactly twice. It belonged to the Obsidian Group, a private, highly illegal corporate intelligence firm that specialized in destroying Fortune 500 companies from the inside out. They didn't have a website. They didn't have an office. You didn't find them. They found you. If an operative from Obsidian had handed me that envelope, it meant Arthur Croft had an enemy far more dangerous than he realized, and that enemy wanted me to pull the trigger. I didn't have a phone number for LT, but I knew how people in the shadows communicated. I took the photograph of my father and Arthur Croft, flipped it over, and scanned the back with a UV light I kept for examining historical documents. A single line of glowing green text appeared. The Cloisters. 10 a.m. Bring the notebook. He expected me to have stolen my father's notebook from Serafina already. He was demanding proof that I was capable of playing the game. I checked the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. I had exactly 2.5 hours to infiltrate Vanguard Design, locate a 14-year-old leather notebook in the D. Allers office of a woman who was pathologically paranoid about her image, steal it, and make it to the Upper Manhattan Museum. I changed out of the navy dress and put on a sharp, tailored black suit. I tied my hair back into a severe knot. I didn't look like the charity case anymore. I looked like a woman going to war. Vanguard Design occupied the top 3 floors of a glass monolith in Midtown. Because I was officially listed as Serafina's personal consultant, my thumbprint granted me access to the executive elevator. I rode it up to the 50th floor, holding a tray with 2 iced matcha lattes from the expensive lattes cafe across the street. The perfect camouflage. The subservient assistant, running errands. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe who was terrified of Serafina, offered me a sympathetic smile. She's in the conference room with the Sterling legal team, Chloe whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. They're finalizing the IP transfer for the merger. She's been screaming at the paralegals all morning. I'll just leave this on her desk and wait for her to cool down, I said, keeping my tone light and conspiratorial. You're a saint, Kaylin. I walked down the sleek, glass-walled corridor and slipped into Serafina's corner office. The door clicked shut behind me, plunging me into the silent, climate-controlled sanctuary of her stolen success. Her walls were lined with framed architectural awards. Every single one of them belonged to my father, or to May. I set the coffees down and moved instantly to her desk. Serafina was arrogant, but she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't leave the physical notebook lying around, where a cleaner could flip through it. The photograph LT had given me showed the notebook on the desk, but that was taken late at night, under a desk lamp. She kept it locked away during the day. I knelt behind the massive oak desk and examined the drawers. The bottom right drawer was fitted with a biometric fingerprint lock. It was an elementary mistake. People who rely on biometric locks rarely change their master passcodes, assuming the physical print is enough. But I had spent the last 7 years organizing Serafina's life. I knew her social security number, her mother's maiden name, the exact date her childhood dog died. I pulled a thin graphite bypass key from my pocket, a tool I had acquired during my deep dive into security archiving, and slipped it into the emergency override port beneath the handle. A digital keypad illuminated. I typed in the date Arthur Croft officially took over Vane Innovations, the 4th of October 2010. A tiny green light flashed. The lock clicked. She used the day she destroyed my family as her password. The sheer, breathtaking narcissism of it almost made me laugh. I pulled the drawer open. There, resting on a bed of velvet, was the blue, leather-bound notebook. I reached out and touched the cover. The leather was worn, softened by years of my father's hands. A violent wave of grief hit me so hard I had to brace my hands against the desk to keep from collapsing. I could almost smell his aftershave. I could hear his voice explaining load-bearing walls to me when I was 10 years old. I didn't have time to mourn. I shoved the notebook into my leather briefcase, locked the drawer, and wiped the handle with my sleeve. Just as I stood up, the glass door to the office swung open. Serafina stormed in, her face flushed with irritation, clutching a thick stack of legal contracts. She stopped dead when she saw me standing behind her desk. "What are you doing back there?" she snapped, her eyes narrowing. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my expression remained entirely placid. I picked up a stray pen from the floor and placed it neatly into her pen cup. "You dropped your Mont Blanc?" I said smoothly. "I brought you your matcha." Chloe said the legal team was giving you a headache. I thought you might need the caffeine before you murder a paralegal. The suspicion in her eyes faded, replaced instantly by her usual self-centered exhaustion. She dropped the contracts onto the desk with a heavy thud, missing Ladis, the drawer containing the missing notebook by inches. They are absolute idiots, Kaylin, she groaned, sinking into her ergonomic chair and taking a long sip of the drink. Vance's lawyers are trying to put a clause in the merger that requires a third-party audit of my patents before the ink dries. Can you believe the insult? They want to verify my work. She was terrified. If a third-party auditor looked too closely at the Ustine honor progression of the patents, they would see the glaring inconsistencies. They Tining 27's Deschens would see that the foundational mathematics didn't match Serafina's known skill level. That is insulting, I agreed, my voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. What did you tell them? I told them my father's legal team would block the merger entirely if they and 4-4, insulted Croft Holdings with an audit. Vance backed me up. He's so fiercely protective of my genius. She smiled, a wicked, triumphant smirk. He told his own lawyers to back down. He trusts me completely. Of course he does. You're his future wife. I picked up my briefcase, the weight of my father's legacy pressing securely against my leg. I need to head to the archives, Serafina. Do you need anything else for the wedding? Preparations today? Just make sure the florist understands I want white peonies, not cream. If I see a single cream petal, I am holding you personally responsible. White peonies, understood. I walked out of the office, down the glass corridor, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing me in. I pressed my back against the mirrored wall and let out a long, shaky breath. Phase 1 was complete. I had the weapon. Now, I needed the army. At exactly 9:55 a.m., I walked through the stone arches of the cloisters in Fort Tryon Park. The museum was a reconstruction of medieval European architecture, a labyrinth of stone walkways, quiet courtyards, and ancient tapestries. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. The heavy stone absorbed sound, and the shadows were deep. I made my way to the Kuksa Cloister, an open-air garden surrounded by pink marble columns. It was a freezing October morning, and the garden was completely empty. I sat on a stone bench, resting the briefcase on my lap. You're early. The voice came from behind a massive stone pillar to my left. A moment later, the man from the engagement party stepped into the light. Without the disguise of a crowded ballroom, Lachlan Thorne was even more blank, intimidating. He moved with a lethal grace, his dark coat sweeping against the Ryanslai Flaschen stone. His copper eyes locked onto my briefcase. He didn't offer a handshake. He sat on the opposite end of the stone bench, leaving a deliberate, respectful distance between us. I prefer Kaylin, I said, my voice steady, and I prefer knowing exactly who I am speaking to before I commit treason against a billionaire. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Lachlan Thorne, lead operative for Obsidian Group. I investigate the untouchables, the people whose money makes them invisible to the law. Arthur Croft has been at the top of my list for years. Why? I asked, gripping the handle of the briefcase. Obsidian doesn't work for free. Who's paying you to take down Croft Holdings? No one, Lachlan said, his voice dropping an octave, the temperature in the air seeming to plummet with it. This one is personal. In 2011, a junior auditor at the SEC noticed a discrepancy in a series of offshore wire transfers linked to a newly acquired subsidiary of Croft Holdings. The subsidiary was Vane Innovations. The auditor flagged the files. 3 days later, his car went over an embankment on the Pacific Coast Highway. The police called it a tragic accident resulting from black ice. He turned his head to look at me, and the raw, unhealed grief in his eyes mirrored my own. There was no black ice that night, Kaylin. The auditor was my older brother. I exhaled slowly, the breath pluming in the cold air. The Crofts hadn't just destroyed my family. They had left a trail of bodies in their wake to protect their stolen empire. Arthur Croft is a monster, Lachlan continued softly, but he is a careful monster. He operates entirely through proxies. The Cayman accounts are in his wife's name. The stolen patents are in his daughter's name. If we go to the authorities with what we have, Arthur's lawyers will tie it up in litigation for a decade. He'll throw Evelyn and Serafina under the bus to save himself. And he'll walk away clean. I don't want him to walk away clean, I said, the venom in my voice surprising. Even me. I want him to lose everything. I want the world to watch him burn. I want Serafina stripped of her title, her reputation, and her future. And I want to do it in front of the one person who gives them their final piece of absolute power. Lachlan's eyes flared with dark approval. Vance Sterling. The merger signing is in 72 hours, I said. It's a massive press event. The governor is going to be there. The board of directors for both companies. Every major financial network is broadcasting it live. If we destroy them, we do it on that stage. A public execution, Lachlan murmured. Ambitious. Dangerous. I like it. But to pull it off, we need an incontrovertible kill shot. Do you have it? I unlatched the briefcase and pulled out the blue leather notebook. I slid it across the stone bench. Lachlan opened it. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the complex mathematical proofs, the original sketches of the ecofiltration systems, my father's distinct looping handwriting. He stopped at the final page. These dates, Lachlan said, tapping the paper. These designs were finalized 2 years before Serafina Croft supposedly invented them. Not only that, I said, pulling a secondary folder from my briefcase. I brought something else. During the night, I accessed the Vanguard design. Servers. I cloned Serafina's personal drafting files. I have the metadata. Every single time she created a new blueprint over the last 7 years, the keystroke logs show she simply copy-pasted the foundational code from an extractable, external, hidden drive. The drive containing my father's digitized work. She didn't write a single line of architecture herself. Lachlan closed the notebook. He looked at me, not as a victim, but as a weapon. He had just unsheathed. You've been living in a viper's nest for 14 years, and you've been quietly milking their venom the entire time. They thought I was a pet, I said coldly. They forgot that pets have teeth. All right, Lachlan said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Here is the play. We can't just leak the documents to the press. Arthur owns half the media outlets in the city. He'll kill the story before it goes to print. We have to bypass the media entirely. We need to hijack the live broadcast of the merger. Signing. My mind raced, the logistical architecture of the plan forming instantly. The signing is happening in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. They're using a massive LED wall behind the podium to display the new joint corporate logo when the ink dries. It's a closed-circuit feed controlled from the AV booth on the Flapes mezzanine level. Obsidian can hack the AV booth, Lachlan said confidently. I can intercept the feed and broadcast the evidence. The bank ledgers, the metadata, the autopsy report. I can put it on a 50-foot screen behind Arthur Croft's head while the cameras are rolling. No, I said, shaking my head. If a random hacker broadcasts it, Arthur will claim it's a deepfake. He'll claim it's corporate sabotage by a rival firm. It gives him an out. Lachlan frowned. Then how do we legitimize it? I looked down at my hands. For 14 years, I had mended their dresses, written their speeches, and built their lies. It was time to build my own truth. I have to be the one to do it, I said. I'm Serafina's best friend. I'm the ward of Arthur Croft. I'm the trusted insider. If I walk onto that stage, interrupt the signing, and present the evidence myself, he can't call it a hack. He can't call it a deep fake. He will be forced to face me in front of the base world. Lachlan stared at me, a mixture of awe and grave concern etched into his features. Kaylin, if you walk onto that stage, there is no going back. The moment you expose them, Arthur Croft's private security will swarm you. He will try to destroy you. You will be placing a target on your own back. My back has been a target since I was 15 years old, I replied, my voice unwavering. I'm just finally turning around to face the firing squad. Lachlan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive, black and featureless. This is an Obsidian Ghost Drive, he said, handing it to me. It contains a custom broadcast override virus. When the time comes, you won't need to be in the AV booth. You just need to plug this into any terminal connected to the Plaza's main network. The podium on the stage will have a laptop for the digital contract signing. If you plug this into that laptop, it will instantly hijack the LED screen, lock the network down, and project whatever files you have preloaded onto the drive. No one will be able to shut it off without physically cutting the power to the entire building. I took the drive. The metal was cold against my palm. It felt like holding the ignition key to a nuclear warhead. Load the notebook scans, the Cayman ledgers, the metadata, and the autopsy. Report onto this, Lachlan instructed. I will handle the perimeter. I'll have Obsidian operatives stationed at the exits of the ballroom. When the chaos hits, Arthur's security is going to come for you. I will make sure you get out of that room alive. And what about Vance Sterling? I asked. He's the wild card. If he backs the Crofts, his legal team could potentially shield them from the immediate fallout. Lachlan's eyes narrowed. Vance Sterling is a businessman above all else. He doesn't love Serafina. He loves the valuation she brings to his empire. But you know him better than I do. How do you break a man like Vance? I thought about the late-night text messages I had ghostwritten. I thought about the rare books, the architectural debates, the intellectual foundation of a romance that was entirely built on my mind, not Serafina's. Vance didn't just love the valuation. He loved the brilliance he thought he was marrying. You don't break Vance with financial ruin, I said slowly. You break Vance with humiliation. You prove to him that the woman he's marrying is a hollow fraud. I will handle Vance. Lachlan stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the freezing stone. Of the cloister. 72 hours, Kaylin. Load the drive. Play your part. Smile for the cameras. And when the time comes, show no mercy. I don't have any left to give. I watched Lachlan Thorne disappear back into the labyrinth of the museum. I sat, alone in the cold for a few minutes longer, feeling the solid weight of my Cluedo, father's notebook, and the lethal potential of the ghost drive in my hands. The chessboard was set. The pieces were moving. It was time to return to the penthouse and play the loyal, obedient Shadow One. Last time, the next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. I returned to the Croft penthouse, slipping seamlessly back into the skin of the dutiful, invisible Kaylin. The penthouse was a hive of chaotic energy. Event planners buzzed like frantic insects. Caterers presented final tasting menus, and public relations executives paced the marble floors, dictating the narrative of the merger of the century. I moved through it all like a ghost, a polite smile glued to my face. Evelyn Croft was in a state of manic perfectionism. She had me alphabetizing the guest list for the third time, complaining that the governor's seating arrangement was too close to a minor tech CEO she found distasteful. I nodded, rearranged the cards, and brought her another cup of chamomile tea. Arthur Croft was locked in his study, fielding calls from international investors. Every time I walked past his heavy oak door, I felt the ghost drive sitting heavy in my pocket. I looked at the man who had ordered my father's murder, and I poured him his evening scotch with a steady hand. Thank you, Kaylin, Arthur said on the evening before the signing, accepting the crystal glass without looking up from his tablet. You've been indispensable. This week, Serafina is lucky to have you organizing her chaos. It's the least I can do, Arthur, I replied softly. You've given me everything. He finally looked up, offering a paternal, benevolent smile that made my stomach physically recoil. We are family, Kaylin. Never forget that. I won't, I promise. But the true challenge was Serafina. She was riding a high of narcissistic euphoria, oscillating between demanding perfection and feigning magnanimous grace. She had me sit in her walk-in closet for 2 hours while she debated which pair of Jimmy Choos projected powerful co-chairwoman without looking too aggressive. Vance is taking me to Le Bernardin tonight, she announced, holding up a pair of red-soled stilettos. A private dinner before the madness tomorrow, he said. He has a surprise for me. She paused, her brow furrowing slightly. He's been asking a lot of questions about the eco-filtration patents lately. Technical questions. He wants to feature the specific water recycling loop in his speech. Tomorrow, remind me, Kaylin, what is the exact flow rate ratio for the greywater diversion system? She didn't know. The woman who held the patents, the genius architect, didn't understand the basic fluid dynamics of her own supposed creation. I looked at her, sitting amidst a pile of designer shoes, completely oblivious to her own profound emptiness. For 14 years, I had handed her the answers. I had built the armor that protected her from her own incompetence. Not tonight. The Greywater diversion system? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. It's a 3-to-1 ratio, utilizing a passive capillary filtration matrix. It relies on osmotic pressure rather than mechanical pumps. It was a complete, fabricated lie. The actual ratio was 5-to-2, using an active biomembrane. A passive capillary matrix would cause a catastrophic backflow, failure within a week. Any first-year architecture student would know it was technical nonsense. And Vance Sterling, who had spent the last year studying the patents he was buying, would definitely know it. Serafina repeated the nonsense phrase back to me, committing it to memory. A 3-to-1 ratio with a passive capillary matrix. Perfect. Sounds very advanced. Vance loves it when I talk technical. It makes him feel like he's marrying an ablage equal. He'll be very impressed, I said softly. She smiled, satisfied, and slipped the Jimmy Choos onto her feet. That night, alone in my small Brooklyn apartment, I loaded the ghost drive. I transferred the high-resolution scans of my father's notebook. I loaded the offshore Cayman bank ledgers proving Evelyn's money laundering. I attached the unsealed autopsy report detailing the potassium chloride in my father's blood. And finally, I added the metadata logs from Vanguard Design, proving Serafina had plagiarized every single blueprint. I set the drive to auto-execute the moment it interfaced with a network. It would override the Plaza Hotel's AV system, lock out external commands, and loop the evidence on the massive LED screen behind the podium. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the digital clock on my microwave count down the hours to the morning. I thought about my father. I thought about the smell of balsa wood in his studio, the way he laughed when a structure finally balanced perfectly, the quiet, profound love he had poured into a legacy that Arthur Croft had stolen for greed. Tomorrow, I was taking it back. October 17th, the day of the merger. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was transformed into a theater of extreme wealth and corporate power. Rows of velvet chairs were filled with Wall Street analysts, international dignitaries, and the entire board of directors for both Croft Holdings and Sterling Logistics. A small army of press photographers was penned behind a velvet rope at the back of the room, cameras flashing continuously. At the front of the room stood a raised stage. A sleek, modern podium was positioned in the center, bearing a polished silver laptop, where the digital signatures for the merger would be executed. Behind the podium, a massive 50-foot LED screen displayed the intertwined logos of Croft and Sterling, glowing a pristine corporate blue. I stood in the wings, just off stage, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. I looked like a high-level executive assistant. Invisible, necessary, ignored. I caught sight of Lachlan Thorne near the back exit. He was dressed in a tailored security uniform, a discreet earpiece in his right ear. He gave me a single, imperceptible nod. Obsidian was in place. The perimeter was secured. The orchestra stopped playing. The room fell into an expectant hush. Arthur Croft stepped onto the stage. The applause was deafening. He raised his hands, playing the humble titan perfectly. "Thank you. Thank you all," Arthur boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing through the cavernous ballroom. 14 years ago, Croft Holdings made a commitment to sustainable innovation. We promised to build a future that didn't just consume, but replenished. Today, that vision is realized. Today, we merge our architectural genius with the unparalleled global reach of Sterling Logistics. Together, we are not just a company, we are an empire. More applause. The press cameras flashed like a strobe light. Arthur gestured to the side of the stage. "I am stepping down today, knowing my legacy is secure in the hands of two extraordinary visionaries. Please welcome the new co-chairman of Croft Sterling, my brilliant daughter, Serafina Croft, and her future husband, Vance Sterling." Serafina and Vance walked onto the stage. Serafina was wearing a stunning, tailored white power suit, looking every inch the conquering queen. Vance walked beside her, impeccably dressed, his expression calm and commanding. But as they approached the podium, I noticed a subtle tension in Vance's jaw. His eyes didn't hold the usual warmth when he looked at Serafina. He looked slightly rigid. My sabotage the night before had planted the seed. Serafina had confidently delivered the fake passive capillary matrix explanation at dinner, and Vance, a man who built his empire on precise logistics, had realized the woman he was marrying didn't understand her own foundational technology. The illusion of her genius had cracked. Now I was going to shatter it completely. Before we sign the documents, Vance said, taking the microphone, his voice smooth but lacking its usual resonance, I want to acknowledge the foundation of this merger. Serafina's patents for the eco-filtration systems are revolutionary. They are the bedrock of our new infrastructure initiative. Serafina, would you like to say a few words about the design that brought us here? Serafina stepped to the podium. She flashed a dazzling, practiced smile at the crowd. Thank you, Vance. The journey to this design was deeply personal. It required years of dedication, late nights, and a commitment to pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Innovation is never easy, but it is always worth the sacrifice. She was reciting a speech I had written for her 3 days ago. I took a deep breath. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. I reached into my pocket and closed my hand around the cold metal of the ghost drive. Run. The stranger's word echoed in my mind. But I wasn't running away. I was running Letta. Straight into the fire. I stepped out from the wings and walked onto the stage. The movement was so unexpected, so outside the carefully choreographed script, that a ripple of confused murmurs swept through the front rows of the audience. Arthur Croft frowned, his eyes narrowing as he saw me approaching the podium. Kaylin? Serafina hissed under her breath, covering the microphone with her hand. What are you doing? Get off the stage. I ignored her. I walked directly to the podium, standing between Serafina and the silver laptop. Excuse me, I said, my voice clear and carrying perfectly into the microphone. The ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The press cameras stopped, flashing. Even Vance Sterling looked taken aback, his eyes darting from me to Serafina. Arthur stepped forward, his face flushing with sudden, suppressed rage. Kaylin, this is not the time for whatever this is. Security, please escort my ward off the stage. 2 large men in dark suits immediately moved from the sides of the room, heading toward the stage steps. I didn't have much time. I looked Arthur Croft dead in the eyes. 14 years ago, Arthur, you stood at my father's funeral and told the world you were saving me. You told the world my father was a disgraced embezzler. You built this empire on the ashes of his reputation. She's having a breakdown, Evelyn Croft shouted from the front row, standing up, her face pale. Someone get her a doctor. I'm not having a breakdown, Evelyn, I said, my voice rising, ringing with a profound, terrifying, unshakable authority. I am having an awakening. I slammed the ghost drive into the USB port of the silver laptop on the podium. The Obsidian virus executed in a fraction of a second. The laptop screen went black, then flared an angry, vibrant red. Behind us, the massive 50-foot LED screen displaying the corporate logos flickered violently. A loud electronic screech echoed through the ballroom's sound system as the AV feed was hijacked. The screen went dark for one terrifying second, and then it illuminated. The first image projected behind Arthur Croft's head, 50 feet tall and impossible to ignore, was the grainy security photograph of Arthur handing the velvet box to my father in the cigar bar. A gasp ripped through the audience. The press photographers, sensing blood in the water, instantly resumed taking pictures, the rapid-fire clicks sounding like a swarm of locusts. What is the meaning of this? Arthur roared, lunging toward the podium. Shut that screen off! Cut the power! He grabbed the laptop, trying to rip the flash drive out, but the system was already locked. The virus had seized control of the mainframe. That is Arthur Croft, I said into the microphone, my voice echoing over his shouting, handing $40 million in a Cayman Islands account to my father, Julian Vane, to buy the very patents you are attempting to merge today. The screen shifted. The offshore bank ledgers appeared, highlighting Evelyn Croft's name as the sole beneficiary of the laundered money. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Board members were standing up, shouting at each other. Vance Sterling took a step back from Serafina, his face an unreadable mask of shock and dawning horror. It's a lie, Serafina screamed, her pristine composure entirely broken. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my jacket. She's a liar. She's jealous. She's crazy. Am I? I yanked my arm out of her grasp, then explained the next slide. Serafina. The screen shifted again. This time, it displayed the Vanguard design metadata, logs. It showed a side-by-side comparison of Serafina's digital blueprints and the external drive files she had copy-pasted them from. Below that, high-resolution scans of my father's handwritten notebook appeared, dated 2 years before Serafina ever claimed the designs. Serafina Croft has not designed a single building in her entire life. I announced to the room, looking directly at Vance Sterling. She plagiarized every patent, every blueprint, every award from the stolen archives of a dead man. She is a fraud. The entire intellectual property valuation of Croft Holdings is a lie. Vance Sterling looked at Serafina. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. Serafina, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm amid the slow cloaks. Screaming room. Is this true? The passive capillary matrix. You didn't know what it meant last night because you didn't write it, did you? Vance, please, listen to me. She's manipulating the files. Serafina sobbed, reaching for him. He stepped back, dodging her touch as if she were radioactive. He looked at the Cylon screen, reading the metadata logs, his brilliant, analytical mind connecting the pieces instantly. The woman he thought was a genius was an empty vessel. Arthur, Vance said, turning to the older man, his voice laced with absolute disgust. The merger is dead. Sterling Logistics is withdrawing immediately. Vance, wait! We can explain! Arthur bellowed, his face purple with rage. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a murderous, unhinged fury. You ungrateful. Little bitch, I fed you, I clothed you, I gave you a life. You killed my father! I screamed, the 14 years of repressed agony finally tearing out of my throat. The screen shifted to its final image. The unsealed autopsy report. The highlighted line detailing the lethal dose of potassium chloride. The ballroom went dead silent for exactly 3 seconds as the implication of the medical document sank in. Corporate espionage was a scandal. Murder was a sensation. Then, the true panic set in. Several board members were already on their phones, calling their brokers, desperately trying to dump Croft Holdings stock before the market realized the CEO was a murderer and the IP was fraudulent. The press was screaming questions, surging against the velvet ropes. Arthur Croft lunged at me. He didn't look like a billionaire anymore. He looked like an animal backed into a corner. His hands reached for my throat. He never made it. Lachlan Thorne appeared from the side of the stage like a shadow detached from the wall. He moved with brutal efficiency, stepping between me and Arthur. He grabbed Arthur's outstretched arm, twisted it sharply, and drove his knee into the billionaire's stomach. Arthur collapsed to the stage floor, gasping for air, his tailored suit crumpling around him. The 2 private security guards who had been moving toward the stage were suddenly intercepted by 4 other men in suits Obsidian operatives who had infiltrated the crowd. A brief, silent struggle ensued, and the Croft security was neutralized. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Lachlan had undoubtedly tipped off the FBI and the SEC moments before I plugged in the drive. We need to go, Kalen, Lachlan said, his hand gripping my shoulder firmly. The police are 2 minutes out. Let them handle the carcass. I looked down at Arthur Croft, wheezing on the floor of the stage he had built. To celebrate his absolute power, I looked at Evelyn, weeping hysterically in the front row as her socialite friends edged away from her as if she were diseased. And I looked at Serafina. She was sitting on the floor of the stage, her custom white power suit wrinkled and stained with spilled water from the podium. She was staring at the massive LED screen displaying the proof of her plagiarism. The illusion of her superiority was completely, irreversibly shattered. She had nothing left. No patents. No Vance. No future. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, her makeup ruined. Kalen, she whimpered, the arrogant princess finally broken. Why? Because shadows see everything, Serafina, I said quietly, adjusting my blazer. And we eventually get tired of the dark. I turned my back on the Croft family for the last time. I followed Lachlan Thorne off the stage, leaving the cacophony of the ruined merger behind. The ballroom was a theater of absolute hysteria. We bypassed the Jashin main exits, where the press had already breached the velvet ropes, and slipped through a concealed service door behind the AV booth. The heavy soundproof door clicked shut, instantly muffling the screaming, the sirens, and the shatter of the Croft legacy. We were plunged into the labyrinthine service corridors of the Plaza Hotel. The air here smelled of industrial bleach and old iron, a jarring contrast to the Perutas. Expensive perfumes and orchids we had just escaped. Keep your head down and your pace steady, Lachlan instructed, his voice a low, stabilizing hum in the narrow hallway. Arthur's private security detail is disorganized, but they are highly paid. Loyalty bought with panic is unpredictable. I didn't look back. My legs moved with a mechanical, adrenaline-fueled precision. My mind was a terrifying blank canvas, wiped clean by the sheer magnitude of what I had just executed. For 14 years, my brain had been a constant, churning engine of survival, calculating every word, every gesture, every breath I took in the presence of the Crofts. Now, the engine had nothing left to process. The debt was canceled. The facade was shattered. We descended a concrete stairwell, our footsteps echoing sharply. At the fade, subterranean loading dock, a matte black armored SUV sat idling, cutting through the gloom. Two men in dark tactical gear stood by the doors. They didn't speak as Lachlan approached. They simply pulled the heavy, reinforced door open. "Get in," Lachlan said, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture of protection rather than possession. I climbed into the cavernous back seat. Lachlan slid in beside me, and the SUV accelerated before the doors were even fully secured, plunging us into the crusted, rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. The city blurred past the tinted windows in a smear of neon and brake lights. I stared at the glass, watching the raindrops trace erratic paths across the raindrops surface. My hands, which had been perfectly steady while I held the microphone and destroyed a billionaire, suddenly began to shake. It wasn't a subtle tremor. It was a violent, uncontrollable shudder that radiated from my chest, seizing my lungs and rattling my teeth. Lachlan noticed. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. People who live in the shadows know that okay is a subjective, often elusive concept. Instead, he reached into the compartment between the seats, retrieved a heavy wool blanket, and draped it over my shoulders. He opened a compartment, poured a measure of amber liquid into a crystal glass, and handed it to me. "Drink," he commanded softly. "It's shock. Your nervous system is trying to process the fact that the predator you've been living with is no longer in the room." I took the glass with both hands, the rim clattering against my teeth, and swallowed the burn of the whiskey. It hit my stomach like a furnace, slowly, thawing the ice in my veins. "Where are we going?" I managed to ask, my voice a hollow rasp. "An obsidian safe house in Tribeca," Lachlan replied, his copper eyes scanning the rearview mirrors, watching for tails. "The NYPD is swarming the plaza. The FBI's white-collar crime division is already raiding Vanguard Design and the Croft Holdings corporate headquarters. But Arthur Croft is a man with a pierced, bottomless war chest. He will have his lawyers file emergency injunctions. He will try to suppress the evidence. And he will realize very quickly that you are the only witness capable of contextualizing the digital trail." "I gave them everything," I said, leaning my head against the cool leather of the seat, the ledger, the autopsy. "What more do they need?" "A narrative," Lachlan said grimly. "Documents can be contested. A defense attorney will argue the ledger was a corporate account you hacked and manipulated. They will argue the autopsy was a tragic medical anomaly that you are weaponizing out of spite. To convict him of murder and corporate fraud, the federal prosecutors will need your testimony. You are the glue that holds the entire indictment together." I closed my eyes, the weight of the blanket grounding me. "So, I'm a target." "You are the only target," he corrected. The safe house was a sprawling, brutalist loft occupying the top floor of a converted industrial warehouse. It was stripped of all warmth-exposed concrete, walls, steel beams, and bulletproof floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Carpin, murky expanse of the Hudson River. It looked less like a home and more like a high-altitude bunker. Lachlan locked the heavy steel door, engaging 3 separate deadbolts and a biometric scanner. There is food in the refrigerator. The bedroom is down the hall. No phones, no internet, no contact with the outside world, he instructed, shedding his suit, jacket, and tossing it onto a leather sofa. Obsidian operatives are stationed on the roof and in the lobby. You are invisible here. I walked to the window, looking down at the city. It was a city I had walked through as an orphan, as a charity case, as a ghost. For the first time, I was looking at it as a conqueror. Lachlan, I said, not turning around. Your brother. The auditor. What was his? Name? The silence in the loft stretched, heavy and profound. I heard the clink of glass, the slow pour of liquid. Elias, Lachlan finally said. His voice lacked its usual sharp edge. It was worn smooth by grief. His name was Elias. He was 26. He loved jazz, he hated the rain, and he was too honest for his own good. I turned to look at him. He was standing by the kitchen island, staring into his glass. The packet of obsidian was momentarily gone, replaced by a brother who had spent a decade hunting a ghost. My father's name was Julian, I offered, the words tasting like ash and honey on my tongue. He used to build miniature bridges out of toothpicks on the Blang kitchen table to teach me physics. He always forgot his umbrella. He thought the world was fundamentally good. Lachlan raised his glass toward me, a silent, solemn toast to the dead men whose honesty had cost them their lives. To Elias and Julian, he murmured. To Elias and Julian, I echoed. That night, alone in the austere bedroom of the safe house, the adrenaline finally evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying, cavernous void. I lay in the Rafalm, dark, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the satisfaction of revenge to wash over me. I waited for the triumph. I waited for the vindication. But revenge is a strange parasitic emotion. Once it consumes its target, it turns inward, looking for something else to devour. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt an agonizing, crushing wave of grief. The dam I had built inside my chest when I was 15 years old. The dam constructed of compliance and survival and silence finally broke. I curled my knees to my chest, burying my face in the stark white sheets, and I wept. I wept for the Portiaches, 200 of the Portiozie, father I had lost. I wept for the mother who couldn't survive the shame. And, to my own profound disgust, I wept for the illusion of Serafina, for the sister I thought I had before I realized she was just a warden in a gilded cage. I cried until my lungs burned and my vision fractured into static, until there was nothing left inside me but hollow, echoing exhaustion. When I woke the next morning, the grief was gone. In its place was something cold, hardened, and utterly unbreakable. The charity case had died on the stage at the plaza. The woman who woke up in the safe house was forged in her ashes. For 3 days, the world outside burned. Lachlan brought me a secure, encrypted tablet patched into the global news feeds. The destruction of Croft Holdings was absolute, biblical in its scale. The media dubbed it the Plaza Massacre. Footage of me slamming the ghost drive into the podium played on a continuous loop on every major news network in the world. Pundits dissected the Cayman ledgers. Financial analysts tracked the catastrophic freefall of Croft Holdings' stock, which had plummeted 82% in 48 hours. Arthur Croft had been arrested in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, flanked by federal agents. The images of the billionaire being escorted into an unmarked sedan, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face a mask of primal fury, graced the front page of every newspaper. He was formally indicted on charges of wire, fraud, grand larceny, corporate espionage, and, thanks to the autopsy report, conspiracy to commit murder. Evelyn Croft was detained trying to board a private jet to Geneva. Her assets were frozen by the Department of Justice, stranding her in a sterile interrogation room without her designer luggage. But it was the footage of Serafina that fascinated me the most. She had barricaded herself in the Croft penthouse. The paparazzi had camped outside the building, capturing telephoto images of her pacing the balcony, looking disheveled, frantic, and entirely isolated. Vanguard Design had publicly Entrainic Zenit terminated her position, releasing a scathing press release distancing themselves from her fraudulent patents. Her Ivy League university had announced an investigation into her academic record. Every single thing she had stolen from me had turned to poison in her hands. On the evening of the fourth day, Lachlan walked into the safe house, his expression grim, carrying a burner phone. "We have a complication," he said, tossing the phone onto the concrete island. "Arthur made bail?" I guessed, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "Not yet. His legal team is arguing for a supervised release, but the judge is stalling due to flight risk. No, the complication isn't Arthur. It's Vance. Sterling." I looked at the burner phone. "What does Vance want?" "He reached out to an Obsidian intermediary. He knows we're holding you. He wants a meeting." Lachlan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Vance's logistics empire took a massive collateral hit. When the merger dissolved on live television, his shareholders panicked. Sterling Logistics lost $1 billion in market valuation in 3 days. He is bleeding, Kaylin, and men like Vance Sterling do not like to bleed. He wants the patents, I realized, the calculation clicking instantly into place. Vance doesn't care that Arthur is a murderer. He doesn't care that Serafina is a fraud. He only cares that the eco-filtration technology, the technology he needs to dominate the shipping industry, belongs to me. He wants to buy it directly from the source. Lachlan nodded. He proposed a secure, neutral location. The under-construction Sterling Logistics Terminal in Brooklyn. It's empty, swept for surveillance, and heavily guarded by his people. If you don't meet with him, he threatened to use his legal team to assist Arthur's defense, purely out of spite, to drag this out in court for a decade. He's trying to hold my justice hostage to get my father's designs. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the billionaire class was a disease that infected them all. Vance was no different than Arthur. He simply wore a better tailored suit and used coercion instead of murder. "I can tell him to go to hell," Lachlan offered, his eyes darkening. "Obsidian can handle Vance Sterling's lawyers. We have enough dirt on his shipping manifest to keep him quiet." "No," I said, picking up the burner phone. "If I hide from Vance, he'll think I'm weak. He'll think I'm the same terrified assistant who used to fix his fiancé's hem. I need to amputate his involvement permanently. Set up the meeting." The Sterling Logistics Terminal was a cavernous, skeletal structure of steel and glass on the Brooklyn waterfront. It smelled of sea salt, welding sparks, and wet concrete. The rain had returned, drumming a relentless, echoing rhythm against the massive skylights. I arrived at midnight, flanked by Lachlan and 2 heavily armed Obsidian operatives. Vance Sterling was waiting in the center of the unfinished loading bay, standing beneath a single halogen work light. He looked immaculate, unbothered by the Prussian, damp cold, surrounded by a dozen of his own private security contractors. When he saw me walking toward him, he didn't offer a polite smile. His eyes were cold, assessing, tearing me down to my component parts. He wasn't looking at Serafina's shadow anymore. He was looking at the woman who had effortlessly dismantled an empire in 5 minutes. Lachlan stopped 10 feet away, signaling his operatives to hold the perimeter. I walked the remaining distance alone, stopping just outside the halo of Vance's light. "Kaylin," Vance said, his voice echoing in the massive space. It was the tone of a CEO opening a hostile negotiation. "I have to admit, you played an exquisite game of chess. I underestimated you. We all did." "You didn't underestimate me, Vance," I replied smoothly, slipping my hands into the pockets of my coat. "You simply didn't look at me. There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "Fair enough. You were an excellent ghost. Those late-night texts about brutalist architecture? The debate over the urban planning monographs? That was all you, wasn't it?" Serafina couldn't even explain a basic filtration matrix to me at dinner, but the woman on the phone had a genius-level intellect. "Serafina was a mannequin," I said coldly. "I dressed her in my ideas because her father held a gun to my future. Don't flatter yourself by thinking you fell in love with her. You fell in love with a mirror reflecting what you wanted to say." Vance took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. "Then, let's stop pretending. The Crofts are finished. Arthur is facing life in federal prison. Serafina is a social pariah. You won. But you and I both know that exposing the truth doesn't pay the bills, Kaylin. The patents for the Frumbling Eco-filtration systems belong to you as Julian Vane's sole heir. You hold the Fariat Plains, intellectual property that can revolutionize the global shipping industry. And you want them. I want to offer you what Serafina stole, Vance said, his voice dropping into a persuasive, hypnotic cadence. I will buy the patents for $50 million. I will install you as the head of sustainable architecture at Sterling Logistics. You will have your own firm. You will have unlimited funding. You can step out of the shadows and become the titan your father always wanted you to be. I looked at him, feeling a wave of profound, exhausted disgust. He truly didn't understand. None of them did. They viewed the world entirely through the lens of leverage and capital. They thought every wound could be bandaged with a check, and every loyalty could be bought with a title. $50 million, I repeated softly, letting the words hang in the damp air. A starting offer, Vance added quickly, sensing hesitation where there was only revulsion, plus a 5% royalty on all global integrations. You know, Vance, I said, tilting my head, studying him like a fascinating, toxic insect pinned under glass. When I was 19, Serafina broke my laptop. She spilled a glass of red wine on it during a tantrum. It had all my final exams on it. I sat on the floor of the penthouse, crying, trying to salvage the hard drive. Do you know what Arthur Croft did? Vance frowned, irritated by the detour. I failed to see the relevance. Arthur handed me a check for $2,000, I continued, my voice hardening into a blade. He told me to go buy a new one, and to apologize to Serafina for making her feel guilty. That is how your world works. You break people, you steal their lives, you murder their fathers, and then you try to hand them a check to make the inconvenience go away. I took a step forward, stepping directly into the harsh halogen light, forcing Vance to meet my eyes. I am not Serafina Vance. I don't want a title. I don't want to be a titan. And I certainly don't want to partner with a man who looked at the destruction of a family and only saw a lost profit margin. Vance's face darkened, the charismatic veneer peeling away to reveal the ruthless autocrat beneath. You are being emotional, Kaylin. Emotion has no place in business. If you refuse my offer, I will deploy my legal team. I will tie those patents up in international copyright courts for the next 20 years. You will spend the rest of your life buried in litigation, and your father's designs will rot in a filing cabinet. You have no resources to fight me. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying expression that made Vance instinctively take half a step back. You think I'm acting alone? I asked softly. I raised my hand, giving a single, subtle gesture to Lachlan in the shadows. A high-pitched electronic whine pierced the air of the terminal. The massive floodlights illuminating the construction site suddenly strobed, and the freight and the Prescian as a weight audio-visual projection system installed for a future ribbon cutting. Ceremony flickered to life against the raw concrete wall. On the wall, a digital ledger appeared. It wasn't the Crofts Cayman accounts. It was a Sterling Logistics shipping manifest from a port in Macau, dated 3 years ago. Highlighted in bright red was a cargo shipment labeled agricultural blank blank. Supplies. Below it, an unredacted Obsidian intelligence report detailed exactly what was actually in those containers. Untraceable military-grade munitions, smuggled past international embargoes using Vance's pristine corporate vessels. Vance's face drained of color. He spun around, staring at the concrete wall, his breath catching in his throat. Where did you get that? He choked out, his eyes wide with genuine panic. I am an archivist, Vance, I whispered, stepping so close to him I could smell the expensive cologne turning sour with his sweat. I spent 7 years learning how to dig through the digital graves of the elite. And my friends in Obsidian? They have been digging in yours. He looked back at me, the arrogance completely eradicated, replaced by the cornered terror of a man realizing he was standing on a landmine. If your legal team so much as files a single motion contesting my father's patents, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper, this manifest, along with the corresponding bribe receipts to the harbor masters, will be emailed directly to the Department of Defense, the SEC, and Interpol. Croft Holdings was destroyed by corporate fraud. Sterling Logistics will be destroyed by international treason. Vance stared at me, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to speak, to threaten, to negotiate, but he had absolutely no leverage left. The ghost had just locked the doors to the haunted house. "Do we have an understanding, Mr. Sterling?" I asked. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the silence. He gave a single, jerky nod. "Good, don't ever contact me again." I turned my back on the billionaire, leaving him standing trembling in the halogen light, and walked back into the shadows toward Lachlan. As we climbed back into the armored SUV, the rain began to fall harder, washing the grime from the streets of Brooklyn. I settled into the leather seat, exhaling a long, steady breath. The Vance Sterling problem was neutralized. The patents were secure. "That was ruthless," Lachlan observed, shifting the SUV into gear. There was a profound, unmistakable respect in his tone. "It was necessary," I replied, watching the terminal fade into the distance. But the brief flicker of victory was instantly extinguished as Lachlan's Biala's encrypted dashboard console lit up with a harsh, pulsing red warning light. An incoming priority transmission from the Obsidian network. Lachlan tapped the screen, and the distorted voice of an operative filled the cabin. "Thorne, we have a breach at the federal courthouse. The judge just granted an Elliplude emergency medical release. Arthur Croft faked a cardiac event in holding. He's been transferred to a private wing at Mount Sinai under federal guard." Lachlan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "Status of the guard?" "Compromised," the operative replied. "Two of the federal marshals assigned to his door have unexplained offshore deposits flagged an hour ago. Croft isn't in the hospital bed. Thorne. The tracking beacon shows he bypassed the perimeter. He's mobile." The blood rushed out of my head, a cold spike of pure adrenaline piercing my spine. "Is he heading for a private airstrip? Trying to flee the country?" I asked, my voice tight. Lachlan didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the wet road ahead, his foot pressing hard on the accelerator. The engine roared as the SUV surged forward. "No," Lachlan said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. "If Arthur wanted to flee, he would have done it before the arrest. A man like Arthur Croft doesn't run from a burning house. He finds the person who struck the match." Lachlan tapped the console screen, bringing up a GPS tracking grid. A single, blinking red dot was moving rapidly across the digital map of Manhattan, crossing the Williamsburg Bridge, heading straight for Brooklyn, heading straight for the safe house. "He knows where we are," Lachlan said, engaging the SUV's tactical locking system. "He bought the location from someone, and he isn't coming to negotiate. Kaylin. He's coming to eliminate the primary witness." I looked at the blinking red dot, the digital manifestation of the monster who had haunted my entire existence. The fear was there, sharp and cold, but beneath it, a dark, consuming fire began to burn. Arthur Croft was coming for me. Good. Let him come. The armored SUV tore through the wet streets of Brooklyn, the tires hissing against the slick asphalt. Inside the cabin, the silence was absolute, broken only by the steady, metronomic ping of the GPS tracker on Lachlan's console. The red dot representing Arthur Croft was moving with alarming speed, closing the distance between the bridge and our location. "How did he find the safe house?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The panic had burned away, leaving a crystallized, hyper-focused clarity. "Obsidian's network is isolated, but no system is perfectly hermetic," Lachlan replied, his eyes scanning the dark streets, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel with the relaxed grip of a professional killer. "Arthur had 14 years to build his empire. He owns judges, police commissioners, and private intelligence contractors. Someone on his payroll managed to ping the private intelligence contractors. Encrypted signal from the burner phone I gave you. They triangulated the broadcast tower. Then we don't go to the safe house," I said instantly. "If he knows the location, it's a trap. He'll have mercenaries waiting." Lachlan gave a grim nod, confirming my logic. He abruptly spun the steering wheel, throwing the heavy SUV into a sharp right turn, careening down a narrow, graffiti-lined alleyway in the industrial district of Greenpoint. "We're going dark," Lachlan said, tapping a sequence into the console. The GPS screen went black. The interior lights of the SUV extinguished. "If he bought our location, he's hunting the vehicle's thermal and electronic signature. We ditch the car and move on foot." He slammed the brakes, bringing the SUV to a screeching halt inside an abandoned warehouse complex. We moved fast. Lachlan popped the trunk, retrieving a sleek, matte black tactical bag. He pulled out a heavy, compact Sig Sauer pistol, checked the chamber with a sharp metallic clack, and slid it into his shoulder. Holster. He looked at me, the copper of his eyes reflecting the faint, jaundiced glow of a distant street lamp. Have you ever fired a weapon, Kaylin? No, I replied, my voice steady. But I have spent my entire life around people who use fear as ammunition. I know how to aim. Lachlan didn't smile, but a flicker of profound respect crossed his face. He reached into the bag, pulled out a smaller, suppressed Glock 19, and handed it to me. It was heavy, cold, and smelled faintly of gun oil. Keep your finger off the trigger until you are ready to destroy what is in front of you, he instructed. We are moving to a secondary extraction point. An obsidian helipad on the roof of an old textile factory 3 blocks east. If we make it to the roof, my team extracts us. If Arthur intercepts us before, then he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We slipped out of the warehouse, melting into the shadows of the Brooklyn waterfront. The rain was a torrential downpour now, soaking through my coat in seconds, the icy water plastering my hair to my face. The noise of the storm was a tactical advantage, masking the sound of our footsteps against the wet concrete. We moved block by block, using rusted shipping containers and abandoned vehicles for cover. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every distant siren sounded like a death knell. As we approached the looming silhouette of the textile factory, a harsh, blinding beam of light suddenly erupted from the end of the alleyway, pinning us against the brick wall. Hold there, a voice barked over a bullhorn. It wasn't the police. 2 matte black SUVs had blocked the exit of the alley. 4 men in tactical gear, carrying suppressed submachine guns, spilled out of the vehicles, fanning out with terrifying militaristic precision. And stepping out from the back seat of the lead SUV, shielded by an umbrella held by a bodyguard, was Arthur Croft. He didn't look like the panicked, defeated man I had left on the stage of the Prime Plaza Hotel. The facade of the benevolent billionaire was completely gone. He looked like the apex predator he truly was, ruthless, desperate, and radiating a plant. Cold, sociopathic calm. Kaylin, Arthur's voice echoed down the alley, distorted by the rain and the bullhorn. Did you really think you could dismantle my life and simply walk away? I am the architect of your existence. I built you, and I can unmake you. Lachlan pushed me behind a large, rusted industrial dumpster, drawing his Sig Sauer in a fluid, practiced motion. 3 shooters moving on the left flank, 1 on the right, Lachlan whispered. Rapidly, his eyes tracking the movement in the dark. Arthur is staying behind. The armored door of the SUV. We are pinned. He doesn't want you, Lachlan, I said, gripping the Glock so tightly my knuckles ached. He wants me. He needs me dead so I can't testify to the autopsy. Report. You are not surrendering to him, Lachlan snarled, his voice a low, protective growl. I have no intention of surrendering, I whispered back, a dark, calculating, calm descending over me. I looked at the layout of the alley, my architectural mind dissecting the spatial geometry. The building to our right. The fire. Escape. The lower ladder is rusted, hanging by a single bolt. If you shoot the bolt, the ladder drops. It gives us a vertical exit to the roof of the textile factory. Lachlan assessed the rusted metal structure in a fraction of a second. It's a 20-foot sprint through open fire to reach it. Then we give them a distraction. I didn't wait for Lachlan to agree. I pulled the heavy, wax-sealed envelope from my inner pocket, the original envelope Lachlan had given me at the engagement party, the one containing the physical copies of the Cayman Ledgers and the Cayman Ledgers. Photograph of Arthur and my father. I stepped out from behind the dumpster, keeping my body angled behind the rusted by DDD metal, holding the envelope high in the beam of their spotlight. Arthur! I screamed, my voice tearing through the torrential rain. You want the original ledgers? You want the physical proof? Arthur held up a hand, signaling his mercenaries to hold their fire. He squinted. Through the downpour, his eyes locking onto the cream-colored envelope. The digital copies were devastating, but physical evidence, containing ink, thumbprints, was the holy grail for a federal prosecutor. Bring it to me, Kaylin, Arthur called out, a sickening paternal warmth bleeding back into his voice. Bring it to me, and I promise I will make this. Quick! I won't let you suffer the way your father did. The confirmation of my father's murder, spoken aloud in the dark, didn't break me. It crystallized my resolve into a diamond-hard point. Go to hell, Arthur. I threw the envelope as hard as I could, not toward Arthur, but straight up into the air over the rusted dumpster. As the envelope hit the apex of its arc, Lachlan stepped out from cover. He didn't aim at the paper. He aimed at the 4 mercenaries. 2 suppressed shots coughed in the rain. The spotlight shattered instantly, plunging the alley into pitch blackness. The second shot hit the mercenary on the right flank in the shoulder, dropping him to the wet pavement with a muffled cry. Go! Lachlan roared. I sprinted. The 20 feet to the fire escape felt like miles. Gunfire erupted behind us, a chaotic, deafening stutter of automatic weapons tearing into the brickwork, sending showers of pulverized stone and sparks into the air. I kept my head down, my legs pumping, my lungs burning with cold air. Lachlan fired 3 rapid cover shots, suppressing the mercenaries' advance. I hit the brick wall beneath the fire escape. Lachlan was a second behind me. He aimed his Sig Sauer upward, fired a single shot at the rusted bolt holding the lower ladder, and stepped back. With a metallic groan, the heavy iron ladder swung down, slamming into the concrete with a bone-jarring crash. Climb, Lachlan ordered, taking a defensive stance at the base, covering the brace alley. I scrambled up the wet, rusted rungs, my hands slipping on the cold iron. I didn't look down. I pulled myself onto the first landing, my chest heaving, and turned to lay down covering fire as Lachlan had taught me. I raised the Glock, aiming down into the dark alley, my finger trembling against the trigger guard. Lachlan vaulted onto the ladder, moving with terrifying speed. Bullets pinged against the iron structure, tearing through the metal grating inches from our feet. We scaled 3 stories in seconds, bursting onto the flat, tar-papered roof of the textile factory. The rain was whipping across the open expanse, driven by a fierce wind coming off the river. The extraction chopper is 2 minutes out, Lachlan yelled over the storm, tapping his earpiece. Keep moving toward the center of the roof. Away from the ledge. We ran across the slick tar, the sound of the mercenaries' boots clanking on the fire escape echoing behind us. They were pursuing us up the structure. Suddenly, the heavy metal access door on the roof's penthouse structure burst open. Arthur Croft stepped out, flanked by his 2 remaining bodyguards. They had bypassed the fire escape and taken the interior freight elevator. We were cut off. Lachlan raised his weapon, but one of the bodyguards immediately leveled a please-daughter place. High-powered assault rifle directly at my chest. Drop the weapon, Thorne, Arthur said, stepping forward, his overcoat flapping. In the wind, or my man cuts her in half. You might kill me, but you won't save. Here. Lachlan hesitated, his copper eyes locked on the rifle aimed at me. He was calculating the ballistics, the reaction time, the probability of survival. The math was devastatingly clear. If he fired, I died. Slowly, deliberately, Lachlan lowered his Sig Sauer, placing it on the wet tar, and kicked it away. Smart man, Arthur sneered. He gestured to the bodyguard. Take his radio. Disarm the girl. The bodyguard moved forward, kicking Lachlan's legs out from under him, forcing him to his knees and ripping the earpiece from his ear. He turned to me, holding out his hand. I looked at Arthur Croft. I looked at the man who had ordered my father's heart to be stopped, who had locked me in a cage of gratitude for 14 years, who had built an empire on the stolen brilliance of a dead man. I didn't hand the Glock to the bodyguard. I raised it, gripping it with both hands, and pointed it directly at Arthur's face. Kaelin, Arthur said, a condescending smirk twisting his lips, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of genuine apprehension. You don't have the stomach for this. You are a sweet, compliant girl who organizes closets and writes term papers. You are not a killer. You're right, I said, my voice steady, carrying over the wind and the rain. I'm not a killer, Arthur. I'm an architect. I didn't aim at Arthur. I shifted my aim slightly to the right, toward the massive, rusted, industrial water tower looming directly behind Arthur and his men. The wooden structure was ancient, held together by corroded steel bands, containing thousands of gallons of pressurized water. During the frantic sprint across the roof, my eyes had naturally assessed the plode Structural integrity of the environment. I knew exactly where the load-bearing tension point was. I pulled the trigger. The suppressed shot was a soft thwip in the storm. The bullet struck the primary steel tension band securing the base of the water tower. The corroded metal snapped with a sound like a cannon firing. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the structural failure cascaded. The wooden staves of the massive tank burst outward under the immense pressure. Thousands of gallons of freezing water erupted in a catastrophic, violent tidal wave sweeping across the roof with the Cardiff Lastin, force of a freight train. Arthur and his bodyguards didn't even have time to scream. The wall of water hit them instantly, picking them up like rag dolls and slamming them violently against the low parapet wall of the roof. The sheer kinetic force of the deluge swept the two bodyguards over the edge, their bodies plummeting into the dark alleyway below. Arthur Croft slammed into the brick housing of the access door, the impact shattering his ribs. He crumpled to the wet tar, gasping in agony, the assault rifle sliding out of reach. Lachlan and I had been standing just outside the primary blast zone of the water tower, bracing ourselves against the industrial HVAC units. We were soaked, battered but upright. I lowered the Glock, my chest heaving, watching Arthur writhe on the ground. The distant rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors broke through the storm. An Any-Plus X end. Obsidian extraction chopper, black and unmarked, descended from the low clouds, its powerful spotlight sweeping across the roof, illuminating the wreckage. Lachlan picked up his weapon, walking over to Arthur. He stood over the broken billionaire, his expression and mask of absolute, terrifying apathy. "Elias Thorne says hello," Lachlan murmured, his voice barely audible over the Ganymede. "Chopper blades." He didn't shoot him. He didn't have to. Sirens were wailing in the streets below, rapidly converging on the textile factory. The police, undoubtedly alerted by the gunfire and the structural collapse, were arriving in force. Arthur Croft was lying on a roof with a shattered chest, surrounded by the bodies of his illegal mercenaries, waiting to be arrested for breaking a federal medical hold. His empire was gone. His legacy was ash. His freedom was permanently revoked. He was going to spend the rest of his miserable life in a concrete cell, entirely powerless, stripped of his wealth, his name a synonym for absolute corruption. Death would have been a mercy. I had no mercy left for Arthur Croft. I turned away from him and walked toward the waiting helicopter. Lachlan followed, pulling the heavy side door open. I climbed inside, sinking into the leather seat, the adrenaline finally leaving my system in a rush that left me dizzy and cold. Lachlan climbed in beside me, pulling the door shut. The chopper banked sharply, lifting us away from the roof, away from Brooklyn, away from the 14-year nightmare. I looked out the window as the city of Manhattan spread out beneath us, a glittering grid of lights and shadows. "Where to?" the pilot asked over the headset. Lachlan looked at me. The decision wasn't his. It was mine. I thought about Vanguard design. I thought about the patents. I thought about the $50 million Vance Sterling had offered me to step back into a Gilded Cay. I didn't want any of it. I didn't want my father's legacy to be commodified by the very people who had destroyed him. The designs belonged to the world, to the Baku, a future my father had envisioned. I would release them open source. I would let every young architect, every environmental engineer, build upon Julian Vane's brilliance for free. The Croft empire was dead, and the charity case was dead with it. I looked at Lachlan, the man who had handed me the envelope, the man who had helped me burn the world to the ground. "Take us to the Obsidian headquarters," I said, my voice finally, truly my own. "I think it's time I learned how to hunt in the shadows." Lachlan Thorne smiled, a real dangerous smile. "Copy that," he said into the headset. The helicopter disappeared into the storm, leaving the ruins of Arthur Croft far below, a small, insignificant speck in a city that was finally, permanently, out of his control.